This is where we are, the Zapatista National Liberation Army. The voice that arms itself to be heard, the face that hides itself to be seen, the name that hides itself to be named. The red star would call out to humanity and the world to be heard, to be seen, to be named. The tomorrow to be harvested in the past. Behind our black mask, behind our ardent voice, behind our unnameable name, behind us, do you see? Nameless. This is where we are, the Zapatista National Liberation Army. The voice that arms itself to be heard, the face that hides itself to be seen, the name that hides itself to be named. The red star would call out to humanity and the world to be heard, to be seen, to be named. The tomorrow to be harvested in the past. Behind our black mask, behind our ardent voice, behind our unnameable name, behind us, do you see? Behind us, we are you.
Zapatista, el cambio. Hello all.
No, Jim.
Thanks for coming back. After that great music, that music was all from Holy Holy Holy, a band from Portland, I think. And this next workshop is with Bonzo and Neala Schleuning, and Jim from Autonomedia, Jim Fleming, will present. We're still waiting on Bonzo. I'm not sure if they're here. If they are, please show yourself. And then, but yeah, Jim, by all means, go ahead, please. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jim.
Oh.
Yeah, I checked down the list.
Okay.
Maybe she has to unmute.
Okay, but let's Jim do a kind of introduction, please.
Okay, cool.
I hear you.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you.
Welcome everyone. I wasn't sure that I was going to be doing an introduction, but I'm happy to do what I can. I've not met Neala before in person, but the autonomous imprint of Autonomedia, known as Minor Compositions, which is largely directed by Stephen Shakaitis in Britain, has had the great pleasure to publish a book of Neala's called Art Politic, Social Anarchist Aesthetics in an Age of Fragmentation, which is extremely comprehensive examination of the role of sometimes avant-garde elements in aesthetic theory and practice, and their relation to anarchism, or anarchisms of various strains. Neala has published a number of other works as well, and she can say more about those. I don't know whether the discussion will center primarily on art politic or on her work in general. Bonzo, the interlocutor, is the illustrator and I guess in some measure author of works by PM Press. And I'm meeting her for the first time as well. So shall I just turn it over to Neala?
Okay, I'm here. Very glad to be here. Enjoyed the last segment as well. There's the other book that we might talk about a little bit at the end of my presentation is my most recent book, Climate Chaos. It's the subtitle is Making Art on a Dying Planet. So it's kind of a depressing book, but some of the same themes appear in that book. There's two things I want to say before I get started. Is someone, technical question, is someone going to turn, you've turned over the control to me of the.
Yes, you should have the screen share now.
Okay, there we go. Let's, don't look at messy desktop. Okay, two things I want to say about the presentation generally. And Bonzo is going to jump in whenever she is moved to say anything as well. And then I believe she'll be following up with a discussion topic as well.
Well, Neala, just a second. So what's the matter? The pronouns is they, them, okay?
Is may. Say that again, please.
We say that
yes.
Bonzo, the pronouns is they, them.
Okay. All right. There's two things I worked on when I wrote this book. It was published in 2013, and Stephen, by the way, is a wonderful editor and helper on both of my books, Minor Compositions. And I should tell everyone that Both books are available as a free download. I think I'm really committed to getting ideas out there in the world, and he has made that a lot easier. I tried to convey, I got interested in this topic because I could see that we were moving in our society from a literal to a visual culture. More and more, especially on social media, words are disappearing and images are taking over. The second reason I was interested then was how you convey very complex political ideas. Aside from showing a usual meme and putting a few words over the picture, how does art itself convey very complex ideas? So that's what I want to talk about. So I'm going to start with a PowerPoint here, and I'm going to move through it very quickly. Somebody holler when we've gone through 20 minutes, if you will. I'd really appreciate that. Okay. We're going to start by, the book covers the only four. There are many, many more, but there are only four movements that I believe made a real impact on art in the 20th century. Dada, Surrealism, Socialist Realism, and the Situationist International. And you can read here. I won't repeat all this because I hate PowerPoints where people just read what's in front of them. But Dada gave us mostly the idea of performance and outrageousness. They took art from the pictures on the wall into the community. Okay. Why isn't this forwarding? Tech people. Okay, here we go. This is the most famous Dada image by Duchamp. He came up with this idea of just going out into a plumbing shop and buying a ready-made, they called them ready-mades then, a ready-made product and submit it to an art exhibition. So this is what he exhibited. He put the name of the maker of the urinal on it, and it was rejected in New York and created a huge controversy. Surrealism emphasized the inner world. It was a product of the significance of that attracted everyone, a world of Sigmund Freud's ideas of looking at our internal self. They tried for a while to be political by joining the Communist Party, in particular Andre Breton, who was kind of the lead spokesperson for the Surrealists. But the communists threw him out because the Surrealists were too wild. Here's a very famous Surrealist image that you're all familiar with, Dolly and the limp watches. Russian socialist realism, I spent some time in the book talking about them because they have had an influence up to our present time on the importance of using realism in political art and the importance of making large statements with art. They also allow all of us who study their art to understand how governments make propaganda. Art initially after the revolution up until about the 1950s, art was a very important part of the communist and the Bolshevik message because there was a large amount of illiteracy in Russia, especially early on. But over the years, one of their first activities was to get people to read. Okay, the aesthetic techniques, idealism, superrealism, in figures, monumentalism, the Soviet grand style, and in particular, the cults of Lenin and Stalin, the cults of leadership. So you can see how the cults of leadership operate in the world. And one thing that interested me about American television is that every single day, the visual of the president of the United States is on some sort of local news item. Okay, here's a classic early painting of Lenin sitting with the peasants, having a conversation with the people. That was a theme that was often repeated. Okay, realism is the best way to communicate. Art must tell a believable story, and so realism is effective. And art can convey a message about the utopian future. American artists in the 1930s used social realist techniques to celebrate the people and their struggles. Here's an image. It's one of 12 that Thomas Hart Benton created called The Sowing of Fascism. They're really quite amazing paintings. But the American artist used, and in America, it's called social realism because we don't talk about socialists at all. But it's a very important statement of art in both literature and in visual art. The Situationist International, of course, is a French movement. They were responsible for the uprising and the celebrations that began in France in 1968 and the general strike that shut down the whole country. One of their leading spokesmen was Marxist philosopher Guy Debord, taught us about the spectacle. And we know the spectacle from looking at the film They Live and from looking at The Matrix in some ways. But there's a capitalism creates a false reality. And so that's one of the ideas that they created. Here are two ads by Adbusters, a contemporary art collective based in Vancouver, Canada. They're a global collective where they use the technique of detournement to turn things around. My favorite is the one on the left of a typical the visual message of a Marlboro ad. But the truth is, we'll turn it around and say, I miss my lung bob by one cowboy to another. The other image, of course, is the world famous image of the ballerina on the top of the Wall Street Bull. And it was the back cover of Adbusters magazine that organized people to come and join Occupy Wall Street. So the Situationist International, I think, is important to study and understand because they, both movements have had a powerful impact globally on political lessons. Until, for example, and I'm being a little simplistic, but until Occupy Wall Street came up with the idea of the 1% versus the 99%, the topic of class was not often discussed in the United States. So now we're going to look at a bunch of contemporary images around what I just called, just for the sake of organizing this material, core political issues for anarchists and other radical politicians. What are the messages that they want to convey? Revolution and resistance, anti-fascism, anti-capitalism, the climate crisis, borders, and guns, of course. So, and there are other topics, of course, and I have a huge collection of all those images. Some of the most prolific political art came out in opposition to Donald Trump, and some of them are really a hoot. Okay. All of these images I found and collected from social media. And it's important to understand the power of social media in today's culture. A lot of people still think television is the primary media of communication of ideas, but print is just hanging on by its fingernails. But social media, visual social media, is the most important platform, I believe, for conveying political messages, which is why I'm interested in studying this art. Okay, these are some of the themes that I talk about in my book, emphasizing local action, the idea of change and the commitment to action, so on and so forth, and other anarchist theories. Okay. Here's a fun one. It's a reconfiguration, a detournement, if you will, of the nationally famous Iwo Jima image from the Second World War. Everyone knows that image, and now it's been appropriated into contemporary political messaging. The other thing I want to say too is that I'm interested in images where the image itself tells a story. So think about that while you're watching these. The fist has been an image since the end of the 19th century. And the image on the right, I believe, is a Banksy image. I can't see my notes because this version of PowerPoint that I use isn't compatible with Zoom. So little technical glitch there. So don't ask me who the artists are, because sometimes I remember and sometimes I don't. Image on the left is from, and on the right, both images are from a collection that Occupy Wall Street created and brought together in their print shop. This says a lot. Okay, anti-fascist images. The IWW poster on the right uses that aesthetic of the larger than life person. Both of these posters were commentary from 2012 about the rise of neo-fascism in Europe. Two posters, Eat the Rich. Latuff, L-A-T-U-F-F, is a very well-known artist who publishes across Europe in many languages and in many countries. These two images speak to the rape and exploitation of the developing countries by the developed countries. They're pretty graphic. I have a bunch of these images explaining the trickle-down theory. I mean, that's the whole point. It's a trickle-down is a very complex theory, but here's an easy way to explain it to people. And of course, the Monopoly guy on the left is, if you notice that his hand puppets are both political parties in the United States. This is a Banksy commentary on capitalism. I don't know where this mural is. You can tell it's on a wall somewhere. The one on the right is a Banksy, and it's on the wall between the wall around Gaza. This image is a portrayal of the plight of the Syrian refugees. This is a painting, probably from the 30s, by Frida Kahlo, and it says, "We didn't cross the border crossed to us." And it's a statement about colonial invasion of Mexico by capitalism. The image on the left is a watercolor, I believe it's a watercolor by a friend of mine who's a Canadian artist, Sam Kurson. He's in Finland right now doing some theater work, and he had worked for several years on the border between Spain and France with the refugees coming across the Mediterranean. And this is a painting that he did of drownings of some of the migrants. Very sad. And of course, the occupation of Palestine. Now we look at guns and the police state. This is a pretty much commentary on politics in the United States, this section. The New Yorker, very popular magazine in the country, is known for doing political covers. This was one of their best, I thought. This is on the left. It's a map, quote unquote, of the United States. On the left, think about thoughts and prayers. I'm one of them. This art has, and the comments about the concept of thoughts and prayers must have gotten through, because you hardly hear it anymore when the leadership in a town or a city or a school where children were killed or whatever hardly ever talk about thoughts and prayers. Okay, this last section is images, some of which are in the book, Climate Chaos, about the climate crisis. And I'm working on another book about the climate crisis. I just can't seem to leave it alone. I'm still shouting into the wilderness about this important topic that in the United States, there's just such a huge amount of denial. This is our love of oil. These two are images from the Native communities here in the Midwest where I live. I'm in St. Paul, Minnesota. And we have had a lot of activism about water and about the pipelines. Several have been shut down, thank goodness. I mean, all these years of protest. The Native communities call the pipelines the black snakes. So there you see a very powerful image of the black snake. This is an image from Poland about our consumer society. And we now have a new god, consumption. And here again is taking a very famous image and making it into a meme.
Yeah, look, 20 minutes. And then it's like also, guys, we have like a translation for Portuguese, Spanish, and English. It's just you needed to press a button in your computer.
Para todos
There
que
we are. We just made it. Okay.
Para todos que precisam de interpretação live, ou no YouTube ou no Zoom, por favor, se vocês estão no YouTube, por favor, entrem no Zoom. E se já estão no Zoom, podem acessar a interpretação usando o botão que diz interpretação, a tradução, usando esse botão de globinho que aparece lá embaixo. Thanks for that. Yes. Bonzo, you're welcome to comment anytime you would like.
Oh, yeah. I just wanted to give a little caveat. So perfectly, right after Neala talked about climate chaos, I'm on the West Coast and we've had horrible smoke everywhere. Just anybody who's on the West Coast right now knows that, none of us can really go outside right now. So you'll have to forgive me. I am coughing quite a bit. I also have dogs in the background who may decide to make some noise. I have a bucket of treats though, so hopefully the only problem will just be my coughing. Neala, I really enjoyed you bringing up the Situationist International, Ben Maria and Black Mask, who are, Situationist adjacent. The SI were like, these people are too weird and creepy for us. We're not letting them in. They're too hardcore. I was always really fascinated by their interventions, and particularly their actually going and trying to shut down galleries, right? Like recognizing galleries as places where kind of like culture goes to die, imagery goes to die. These are places that are funded by horrific pipeline companies and Wells Fargo and all of these different things. During Ben Maria's time, it was directly profiting off of the occupation of Vietnam. And then, of course, museums are also places where tons of people's culture has just been stripped and stolen and put on the wall. So I always really enjoyed, particularly with, kind of a lot of the situation is how they were actually like, no, we need to shut down the museums. Like, these are not places where life is happening. This is where all of our creative potential has gone to become stultified and die. Oh, I think you're on mute.
I think the shutting down of MoMA was a great act of art. When they announced in advance that they were going to shut down the Museum of Modern Art, and the police showed up and the building was surrounded, and one of the members of Black Mask walked up to the front door and put a sign on it saying closed and walked away.
Yeah, they shut down one of the just like biggest institutions in New York just with a funny flyer and then a piece of paper. Like really, really wonderful. They also, one of my other favorite actions from them is they, there was like a huge trash strike going on, and this was predominantly impacting like, poor neighborhoods, like Puerto Rican neighborhoods. And so they massively collected trash, and then they walked over to this huge rich art gala and just like dumped everything at the gala, and just like these wonderful interventions that are just like punk too. Like it's wonderfully punk.
Do you want to talk a little bit about your art? I understand you're involved in making murals, which is an important, very important concept in connecting with communities.
Oh yeah. So I guess just a little bit about my background. I am, for better or worse, just a punk. I didn't make it through high school. I also didn't try to make it through high school, so really nothing of value was lost. And I pretty much came up and was predominantly like introduced to art through subcultural spaces. So, punk spots, like hip hop spots, just various sites where, you have a lot of people who care very deeply about many things, and they're generally like much more radical spaces. Of course, there's always like bad shit going on, right? But like for the most part, these are radical spaces. And so a lot of the early stuff I did was, graffiti and wheat pasting. Also, Ben Maria, they wheat pasted the town. Or the Situationists were very big into wheat pasting. Yeah. And so a lot of my background is in things that artistic practices that are generally more accessible than maybe some other things, right? Like if you want to oil paint, it's going to cost you maybe like $500 to like get the oil paint set up. But if you want to, go scam a Kinko's copier and print up posters, like it's a lot cheaper to scam. I have, due to a series of unfortunate events, I no longer participate in the illegal application of paint to a wall. And now I do kind of nice murals where they let you have permission and nobody calls the cops on you when you do it. You do it in broad daylight with your friends. And, I want to say that, Portland is really changing, and even our ability to do murals as they connect to the community have really, it's been really, really impacted by the development and the flow of capital into here. A lot of the new murals we see coming up are, they're condos who are trying to present an idea of the type of lifestyle you could have from living in the condo. And so a lot of our opportunities to actually be like, hey, I'm like part of this neighborhood, like I'm friends with all of these people, and like we have an ugly wall that we hate looking at, and we're going to make something that, hopefully most of the people in the neighborhood will enjoy. These things have kind of decreased. However, I will say, during the particular uprisings we had here, we had a surge of both people engaging in graffiti, vandalism and stuff that the Buff just couldn't keep up with. Like, I assume the Buff just cried for the last 2 years. But we were also lucky enough that we had this moment where a lot of people who are property people, who do have like, I own the fucking mall and this like ludicrous, Macintosh store, they were kind of forced to let people paint radical imagery, especially like imagery that specifically talked about that George Floyd experienced, and that, many people experience as a result of police violence, the ongoing legacy of white supremacy, patriarchy, all of these different things. So we did get this like cool opportunity where like people saw a ton of political murals where like pretty much that it almost completely dried up in Portland.
That's the same thing happened in Minneapolis. We had gradually been putting up murals, and I make a distinction, excuse me, between street art, because a lot of that is just really nice, and then political art and murals that carry a political statement. But after George Floyd was killed, there are the buildings up and down the street that was literally burned to the ground are being restored, and the owners of the building are discovering that if they put murals about the community around them on the buildings, the amount of graffiti drops to zero.
Oh, yeah.
And so there's a real understanding. I mean, the little town I live in, it's a first ring suburb in the Twin Cities, but we have a huge debate here because somebody painted a fence with Black Lives Matter on it, and the city council went ballistic, but they're still getting a lot of pressure. And now it's election time, and the posters are going up all over the city about whatever political issue that people want to convey. So that, it's very important that people have a growing respect for the political statements. And of course, Banksy is our global leader on this. Have you seen, they're doing a terrible thing here, our museum, Minneapolis Institute of Art, I think all over the country, they have monetized Banksy. I mean, he just puts his stencils up and then people take pictures of them. And now you have to pay $10 to go to the museum to look at his works on a wall. So it's topical and it's very important, but what it does is it also connects people to the community that they live in. And if they have over the messaging of the murals, that's really important. We had in the book I talk about it, we had one of the last great strikes in the United States was at the Hormel Company in Austin, Minnesota, 1985-86, and the workers hired Aylwitz, Michael Aylwitz? Anyway, that's his last name, Aylwitz, but I'm blanking on his first name, to paint a mural. And they painted this beautiful mural, very political mural, on the side of the wall of the Labor Center. And when the National Union came in and shut down the strike, they wanted it sandblasted off the wall. They actually had to have a light and a guard watching it day and night because the strikers, the non-strikers, wanted to destroy it. But they finally decided to get rid of it, and they did it themselves because they couldn't hire a union sandblaster anywhere in the state to come in and take the sign down. So and Mike Aylwitz has talked about, he's done murals all over the world, and he said some of them do get torn down. So there's often a resistance to art that makes political statements.
Yeah. I mean, I think too, so if you're in Portland in a couple of weeks, we're going to be showing this movie, but there's this marvelous movie called Vigilante, which is a graffiti movie, but it's actually like not about graffiti writers. It's about the people who buff it, right? And a lot of times I think we'll often just be like, oh, people buff because they're like, it's illegal, they're like, oh, this crime happened, we got to get rid of it, or like, I don't like what it says. But it's these interviews with graffiti abatement and with, people who are called graffiti vigilantes, the people who go around and volunteer to buff, right? Just the most is, this running theme that goes through it is there's visual noise. I hate this visual noise. There's visual noise everywhere and I have to take it down, and of course, like, we're all in spaces of like incredible intense visual noise. Like, wherever you go, there's like ads and there's like weird fucking brutalist construction and like all sorts of other stuff. And it's like, you kind of understand what they mean by visual noise. They mean like other people are here, right? I hate seeing that other people are here. Like, I want a completely like sanitized, controlled, bureaucratic area where everything is permitted. Everybody has to like fill out a 2-page form if they want to tag on the wall. And yeah, that's so funny to me. They couldn't find a union to sandblast it. Like, so perfect. Like,
yeah. Well, the George Floyd memo at 38th in Chicago, in Minneapolis, has had to be repainted at least 3 or 4 times because someone comes in and tries to destroy it. So it's if anyone asks about the power of political art, they can just look up examples of ways that art has been attacked, and political art in particular has been attacked and desecrated.
Yeah. I think a lot, I'm both influenced by like punk and also this 120-year-old discipline of art. One of my favorite artists, Walter Crane, I think, even if we don't know his name, we've seen his imagery, right? He made the garland for May Day and a lot of the really big, the Haymarket martyrs that had all of their faces in it, just truly lovely stuff. But he, at the time, almost like all anarchists, socialists, and communists were, and I mean, most normal people were opposed to the Boer War, and particularly the British, occupation, imperialism, and everything. And he had made all of this stuff against, British imperialism, and like the monarchy at the time burned like a shitload of his work. And this is, like none of it was digitized. None of it, this is like 120 years ago and stuff like that. And it's just like, you didn't have to do that. Like, and it's just, it had to be destroyed because it talked about a different way of being, right? And it was highly critical of what was going on and gave people a meeting place where they could all be critical together.
Yeah. Yeah.
I wish we had that art still. Damn the monarchy.
Really. Do we want to take questions from any other people? What do you think?
Oh, us? I'm down with anything. The smoke made it, so I just I'm just happy to be talking.
Okay. Well,
yeah, I'm down with anything. I'm happy.
Can you, one more thing, and then we can maybe open it up to some questions. When the first image came up talking about this workshop, you had done some artwork for a book by Peter Kropotkin. Do you want to talk about him at all? And
yeah,
work?
Thank you. You're doing a better job than me at my publisher will thank you. So I spent a number of exhausting and wonderful years taking one of Peter Kropotkin's kind of most seminal works. That's also one of his most accessible, right? For those who have read maybe like The Conquest of Bread or like Ethics, right? Those are a little bit like, like kind of takes a minute to get through those, right? So taking Peter Kropotkin's Mutual Aid, which I think, it's highly accessible. And it's also something that is just like a very simple articulation of a very, very wonderful tendency that, exists in us, right? And so I spent a couple of years basically working within the tradition of a lot of the socialist and anarchist artists who were contemporaries of Kropotkin, and doing a treatment of his work and fully illuminating it, while also including a number of maybe more modern examples of what we see as mutual aid. Kropotkin was, of course, limited by the fact that he wrote this in like 1899 and 1902. And there are exhaustive examples in the book, just like boom, boom, this example, this example. So I tried to also pull this forward into maybe more current dialogue. So showing things like food not bombs, needle distribution and safer supplies, but also things, maybe like bank robberies or jailbreaks or things, right? These take like high amounts of cooperation and are definitely trying to produce, some like social good in the world. So yeah, I have to be honest, I started working on a new project now and I'm like, oh, I totally forgot that I did that. I think I think it's a good way to have interacted with a very old text, right? Trying to pull that 120 years almost perfectly into our current. And I will say I started working on this before COVID, right? So who could have known that there was going to be like such an explosion of conversation around mutual aid as a concept?
One of the things that really interests me about political art is wondering, just a minute, somebody had a great question here.
I need to open the chat.
Lorraine asked a question. What can we do about visual noise? Yeah, do you want to respond to that?
No, I mean, I think that there are a number of maybe like electoral interventions you can take, but we're kind of cooler than that, right? Like who wants to waste their time doing electoral interventions? I mean, I think one of the easiest things to do is to vandalize it, right? I mean, a lot of billboards are just like straight up offensive, right? We get so, I'm sure every city is like this, but I'm rooted in Portland. Like we get so much propaganda out here, just these huge billboards that are like meet officer friendly, and you Google them and you're like, that's a Nazi cop, what, So I think, one of the biggest things we can do is just straight defacing it and making it so it doesn't even exist anymore. And you don't have to have any type of technical skill to do that, right? Like spray paint is actually a highly accessible tool. You just press a button, which is really nice. But I think oh, sorry.
No, I was just going to say, I have a little story from the early days of the second wave of the feminist movement of climbing. That was when I could still climbing a 2-story billboard to spray paint on some ads that were offensive to images of women. Go ahead.
I mean, best way to deal with it. Really giving yourself permission to be like, I hate this and it's not allowed around here.
Yeah.
If you want to, the other option that maybe has less risk applied, right? Because even though vandalism is accessible, it does come with a high amount of risk, which does decrease, people's ability to engage in it, is just being able to talk to people who are around and asking them questions and asking them like, would you like to see something else here? We could just put something else here, right? Like if there is an area of your town that's like constantly just like covered in different things, like you can just talk to people and see. I mean, maybe they'll be like, I like the ads, right? I'm like a miserable person who just loves seeing advertisements every minute of the day, but like for the most part, you can just talk to people and go, just choose to put something else up there. Unfortunately, I mean, we're never going to have the resources that Clear Channel has, right? Like these billboards cost them like 28 grand to put up. It's absurd. But spray paint costs like $5. So
yeah, and I think, looking back to the Situationist International, I think that this concept of determined is another way to disempower these images. I saw a lot of that with political images about Trump. If you make him look like a fool, you're disempowering him. You're taking away the, the energy of his image.
No, or like a lot of I think about I think it was King Mob maybe who did it. Like, so on the tube train, on one of the main tubes, it's one of like, not anymore, modern graffiti artists have beaten them, but they had that huge, like, every day, same thing, go to work, look at the ads, come home, sleep, get back in the morning. It's this huge painting they did that like, hundreds of thousands of commuters saw. And it's that same thing of like, it's disempowering the things they see around them, right? Of just like mentioning that like what you're seeing around you is like, visual noise that has like a specific purpose to it.
Altering art in public places also, if you can get away with it, like on the public transportation or something, spray painting or writing over ads, and then more people see it.
Yeah. And I mean, I think too, oh, sorry. Did somebody? Oh, sorry, Jim.
Yes, Jim. A year and a half or 2 years ago, I started gathering these Trump images and decided to put them on a Facebook group that I called Moranarchy. There are hundreds of them. It's really quite astounding how prolific the anti-Trump visual meme has become. I would love to try to put a book of these together, but I can't figure out how to get them. I guess in part this is an issue about ownership of the image and copyright and anti-copyright strategies. But more immediately, Autonomedia has published many anti-copyright books and has an extremely casual attitude toward intellectual property law. But I can't figure out technically how to gather these images for print purposes. If there are any of you who deign to use Facebook and know how I can do that, I'd be very pleased to learn.
Jim, you can use Google's image search feature.
Yeah. Well,
that's what I did when I chose the images to put in my climate book. And sometimes it took like a whole day to track down who was the original artist. But usually you can discover who the original artist was. If you ever want to do that, I have a ton of Trump images as well. I can send along to you.
Well, if you have some time, take a look at Moranarchy Facebook group, which is got hundreds. I think if you just go to the little tab that says archive maybe or image bank or something, hundreds of them will appear.
Yeah. I when I teach this class, I show a lot of those images and people just hoot and holler. They love them.
Yeah, some are just fabulous.
Okay, do we have any other questions?
Oops.
You can unmute or put it on chat, one of the two.
Yeah, I mean, we want to ask everybody if you want to have a question. I mean, here, everybody have a voice. I mean, everybody can ask questions directly, Okay. We would like to talk, for example, yesterday, we did the Anarcho Art Lab together with Non Grata. That's an anarchist group from Estonia. We did in the park together with the book fair, and then we go the whole group, around
around 7 p.m.
7 p.m. 7 people, we rode from the community garden to Thompson Square Park. And we talk about the abortion and, the women, how they assassinate women. I think like a protest performance art, we have been doing that. As soon as also we have been doing like, we don't separate the art from the life. No, for example, 10 years ago, we did a performance, me and my ex-girlfriend, we went in monuments and military place, church, mosque, and many different places, have sex there to try to desacralize the patriarchal architecture. And the point is, like, art and life become one thing, and how we can do rituals, no? Also, other things I think is rituals to desacralize things, to really go inside things. For example, when we have sex inside the organ in the church, no, the father and the conductor find us, no, and was really embarrassed because we were in the St. Patrick Cathedral doing sex there in the middle of the Maasai, and the guy was crazy. What are you doing? How could you do that? How could you, know? And I say, no, sorry, I'm a foreigner, you know, I don't experiment the ecstasy of orgasm and your situation, no? Was so funny, I'd like you to comment, guys, the relationship between the life and art, and how we really actively, a protest or intervention or confrontation with buildings or confrontation with situation. We did many confrontation with immigrant ICE here in New York, with the, como é que é a Bolsa de Valores? Exchange, stock market, Wall Street, we do confrontations like real, like we are there, we confront, we do the performance, we record, we what do you guys, Neala?
Can I add something? Sorry. So all let's talk about confrontation.
Yeah.
Reminds me of the notion of autonomous zones. So it's creating spaces that aren't necessarily material, although of course, as we've seen after the George Floyd uprisings, many temporary autonomous zones were material, but it's also the notion of if performance art can be this transgressive thing that disturbs and that questions what we consider normality, right? And that reimagines how we associate ourselves with other things, with institutions, like the stock market, for example, or like organized religion. It creates spaces in which we're temporarily free, and spaces that are also, by being free, so public and so visible, which kind of force people who aren't in those spaces and in those zones to kind of engage with things that they previously wouldn't really have thought of, and just things that moves or expands the boundaries of what may be considered normal, or expands the barrier, exposes people to unfamiliar things, and in a way that's revolutionary in some sort.
Yeah, performance art was a great technique used by the Dada artists everywhere. That was one of their big characteristic methods of communicating to people. Performance art, more than any other, I believe, engages people in real kind of change, and we need to do more of that. I have one last question that I'd like to ask of people, of everyone. Particularly when I look at the art around the climate crisis, is that it's really important that we have stories about the future. Very famous quote by the Situationist International, "Another world is possible." But I don't see a lot of images in the art about what the next world could look like and what our world will be like after we solve these climate crises. So how do we as artists, or how do we encourage artists to create images that will move us toward some future, not a utopian, unrealistic future, but to a real living future?
I mean, I think Bonzo really did that. That's one of the things I really love this book, because I can envision many mutual aid that we love so much. The art. And of course that.
Yeah. The punks. All right. I love what you said though, because you know, I think that this is a thing that like impacts everything we make, right? Like what are the symbols and the signposts that we are creating? Because like when we create those, like a number of people are probably going to see them, and it's an articulation of a thing that could happen, right? And so if we're choosing to put into our imagery for like what, you know, potentially like a rupture or a revolution could look like, if we put a bunch of guillotines in there, right? Like that is not something we want, right? Those are just like state authoritarian apparatuses, right? But if we keep looking at the guillotine, it's like possible that somebody could actually try and bring out a guillotine, you know, in a moment of rupture, right? And so I like what you said, because it's like, you know, this is, or at least like, it's something that's very important to me. And I know many of the other artists that I speak to, it's like that the symbols and signposts that we actually do create, they are things that are accessible, like you said, right? Like they're things that are like attainable. They're not completely like, you know, needing to like summon a fucking elder god or something like that, right? Like they're things that could happen. And also that they're reproducible, right? So things that like can echo and reverberate with many different people, rather than, you know, also like, you know, going back to that guillotine image, like that is like operated by one or two people, right? Whereas something like a brick or a Molotov can be operated by any number of different people. So yeah, I love what you say just about like, we need, you know, we need imagery like for that utopian future that is like, you know, actually like anarchist.
I would like to say that among writers, there is something called the solar punk writing.
Oh yeah.
In which science fiction writers and other writers write about a positive, hopeful future. And I've contributed to many of these anthologies and books. And I'm sure some of the books probably have imagery in them. But there is definitely a visionary movement going on among writers. And if where writers go, probably artists will come, as to give people hope for the future with the solar punk movement. So I don't know if you're aware of that.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Yeah.
You know, a couple of years ago, I did a presentation at an international conference on the environment, art and the environment. And one of the things that really concerned me was that a lot of the presentations were about artists having private experiences with nature. And my presentation was one of very, very few that talked for a 3-day conference that talked about collective work and about politics. So anyway, it looks like our time has run out. We don't want to run into anybody else's time, do we? Right?
So actually, you have half an hour left.
Yeah, we have.
What? Dope.
I thought it was one.
Possible.
Oh, well, then I'll shut up. All right, go ahead.
Oh, let's talk.
Not at all, yeah.
Yeah, let's talk.
Right. I'd like to propose a project that I've had in mind for a long time and haven't really been able to advance much practically, but I would love to see an art show called The Zero Work of Art, which would be art against work. I think that
Yes.
the traditional definition of art, or a frequent phrase about art, is that should please and instruct. And it's always felt to me that the way to properly understand that is that art should instruct about avoiding work and the pleasure extinction of the death in life that work epitomizes. So anybody, I know of a fair number of images that are fairly that are quite centrally appropriate for such a project. But if anybody knows of others, send them my way.
You want to share some with us, Jim, now? Some image that you're talking about?
I don't have anything ready, I'm afraid, but
Next time.
maybe, well, if I were more adept in Zoom, maybe I could dig some up and get them posted promptly, but I probably can't find them quickly enough.
Yeah, no
But
worries.
I've got a good archive of them.
Amazing.
I'll send you some, Jim.
Great.
Just to go back to one of Bonzo's points about, I guess, a theme that's been recurring throughout, which has been things such as like depicting Molotovs and bricks rather than guillotines, right? We're engaging in arts that is like really, really easy to reproduce, like wheat pasting and spray painting, and in a way, and even this idea of Jim's about art against work. I mean, all of that is obviously directed to anarchism conceptually, right? It's promoting images that look towards an anarchist future, but they're also in themselves extremely close to the heart of anarchism, which is prefigurative, right? It's not only thing, but it's already living through what the future will be, right? That's why these performance art that's transgressive is so, it makes us rethink not only, the structures that we live in today, but also what a future may be, a future in which, we have to face climate change, and a future in which we have to face all the social unrest, and maybe we'll move past it, right? But that the point in later is something that's unclear, and these interventions that are popular, accessible to all, help us redo that.
Good. Other thoughts, folks? Someone did comment, by the way. They asked if they could have access to the images afterwards.
We post after in the website of the Anarchist Book Fair. No worries, we don't lose because we will do.
Yeah, we'll be recording all this, and it's going to be on YouTube. But also, if anybody wants, I'm not sure if they mean the PowerPoint, for example, that Neala, you were showing. If that's the case, then you can just email us, and then we'll put you in contact if you want the full PowerPoint, or if you're comfortable.
I do want to say, though, it's like, I think what we want to do is always respect the artists that created this work. And one of the things about a Facebook is that they decided years ago they're not going to pay any attention to copyright, so that anything that gets shared on Facebook is there. I do have a Facebook page called Art Politic, the book. That's the title of it. It's a page, and you can go look there, and maybe if you wade through like 1 million images, you can see something that you like. But it's like I use these images teaching, where it's appropriate to to use images without contacting the artist. But if you want to use them permanently for something, you really need to get in touch with the artist for copyright approval. I did for my climate book, and most of them, the vast majority of them, said go ahead and use the images, and I thanked them profusely. So, but I think that's a good question. So if you want to use it for something, you can try Google image search. There's a special website on Google, a special place to find out who the artists are.
Yeah.
So I think on the climate crisis, I'm not a visual artist. I'm a writer, and my story about the climate chaos and the climate crisis in my book is a dark story, because a lot of the literature that I read is a dark story. And so but looking at things visually, and I did find a few artists that are trying to portray images of the future, not that are cute, but that are realistic about how we're going to live in the future. So if any of you have any thoughts or any images positively about how we're going to move through this climate crisis business, be sure to contact me.
Yeah, I think the place where I see a lot of really wonderful stuff being made right now is with the Just Seeds collective.
Yes.
Everybody whomst among us doesn't know Just Seeds. And whereas, I mean, I don't know how often you see imagery within Just Seeds that's like, this is like post, we figure there's like a hopefulness to, I feel, their climate pieces because they show that like it is possible to address it and we can do that together rather than maybe like hiding in little bunkers and like becoming little warlords over like scarce resources and stuff like that. So I feel like Just Seeds has really been the only, or I mean, there's many folks, I don't mean to, you know, like not mention somebody, but like, I feel that's like the biggest collection I've seen of like great folks like really addressing it.
Well, Ricardo Levins Morales in the Twin Cities also does a lot of beautiful work about the environment.
Yeah.
But it's we need to have more of that and how we are going to live together. That's what I tried to write about in Climate Chaos, about how we're going to live. And I think that's what my next book is going to be about is I think we have to go back to a simpler lifestyle, which nobody will want to hear. All the solutions now are either technology is going to save us or capitalism is going to save us. And I don't think that's going to work.
Yeah.
So anyway, I'm looking for help on this, folks. So if you have any thoughts, I'd really appreciate it.
Other aspect that we work in, for example, the performance is like a collective creation. No, I mean, because how you can be like keep your individuality, but at the same time share the collective creation with the other thing. Then Anarcho Art Lab work like that too. We have different medias, from different countries, people, and we try one interfere in all the work, but it's smooth in the way that you add things, and then in the end, the work was created in reality for a collective. We don't like the idea of mythifying, this improvisation, like in collective creation. That's all the things that we have been experiment for 16 years, really in positive way, like how we broke the borders between media, how we broke the borders between the artist myth. We want to destroy that, and how we be like this collaboration, that.
Yep.
I love a lot of the arts and crafts movement that I've referenced a couple of times, like Morris and Crane, and even there's a philosopher named John Dewey who himself wasn't an anarchist, but anarchists fucking loved him, and he loved anarchists. So like, way to go, Dewey. You didn't hate us. Thank you. A lot of people took his classes and said he was a real nice guy. But they talk very strongly about like the danger of this idea of an artist, right? That now creation, joy, pleasure, all of these things are like shunted into a single individual, and it's inaccessible for nobody else. You have to be this like special mythic figure to be able to create. And the arts and crafts movement and Dewey, Black Mask, I mean, so many people have really articulated that, like, no, this is, like, art is part of our everyday experience. We should all feel the ability to create, feel the ability to participate within these collective artistic endeavors. We should see the world as our collective artistic endeavor, right? And oh, sorry, dogs are making noise. Hold on, I'm gonna mute for a second.
Oh, I think that's important, that we find ways to communicate to people that you don't have to do this alone, that you can do it with other people. And incorporate,
for example, yesterday, when we see how the public become the artists, how we all together, we march together, and then we dissolve what is public, what is artists, and then suddenly everybody become artists, I mean, we'll share the performance that we did yesterday because it was really like that. Now, how we incorporate everybody, and then the life is a theater at the same time. We are here all represent in the same time. We together what we shoot, and then we stop that, and then everybody come, and then Non Grata put people to hold things like. But it's not, it's like sculpture, but that's galhos que penduravam cabeças.
Oh yeah, so it was like banners, and off these banners there was ropes and what are they made of? Like these heads.
Yeah, the heads. And then in the end, we put fire in these heads, and then we say, stop killing women, stop doing all this. You know what I mean? It's like I don't know. I think it's a continued process and never a product. That's I like a lot the project of Jim, because it's a kind of alive.
Yeah.
One of the projects that I'd like to share some information on. I have a friend in London who's a filmmaker, does wonderful, enjoyable films about political change and making a new world. And his latest project is called Power Station. His last film, he got the idea from strike debt. So he's very familiar with Occupy Wall Street. But this new film is called Power Station, and he has a power website that you can all look up about film. Just put in Power Film and he'll appear. But he's in the process of organizing, making this event happen and making a film about this event. And what his project is to put solar panels on every house in his neighborhood in London, because because the cost of energy in England is just going sky high. So he's putting this together and raising funds to buy all of this equipment. But he has sparked interest all over England, and I'm hoping all over the world, about how people can act collectively every day to make change for the environment and for themselves in their daily lives. So if you have a chance to look up that project, it's really a wonderful, wonderful project.
Please, Neala, let's share that when we would like to, put in our website and share with everybody. Let's share that. That's really amazing.
What was the name of that person?
It's Daniel Edelson, Edelstyn, Dan Edelson. And you can either look him up or look up power.com and Power Film. Just look up Power Film.
Okay.
But he's just doing a wonderful, wonderful project, and not by himself. He's doing it with all these people, and then he's raising money on top of it to pay for all this equipment to put on the project. But what's empowering about it is all these people will have low energy bills, and they have done this for their whole neighborhood.
I like the idea. That's a phenomenal and cool project. I like that idea too, because kind of just like we were talking about how the idea of artist has become like mythologized and put on a pedestal, so has this idea of like activist, right? Like to be an activist, you have to be hired by SAU and paid $25 an hour. And then you go and you organize people, right? The people are disorganized. You go in, you organize them, right? And it's projects like that where it's like, no, we can all do this. Like we all have permission to come together and do something with each other, right? We don't have to like just put it into a little like fiefdom of specialization and professionalism.
That's a wonderful insight. It's about doing things together.
Yeah.
It also reminds me, sorry, just to be clear, we have around 10 minutes left for this presentation.
Okay.
The idea of death of the artist reminds me of the essay, Death of the Author by Roland Barthes, which is a very, very famous essay in social theory, but also in literary theory, and in which, Barthes says that now meaning is produced mainly from the reader. So the author is gradually irrelevant, and it's really the reader who's kind of producing more and more meaning. And in a way, artwork that is becoming increasingly common, like the Nongata performance, right? It has a very, very distinct meaning. We know what it wants to say. We know what the performers want to say, but it's also open for the audience, for the public, to create their own meaning. The Anarcho Lab performance.
Yes.
One of the things that Anarcho Art Lab does, in my view, which is a fairly limited view of the entire project, is that it's also kind of re-questioning what the distinction in between a viewer of a performance art and the performance artists themselves, while having that kind of common theme intact.
We brought that again.
Yeah.
So this should be all the time, no? Questioning.
I think we have another question. Oh, and a comment, New York City funding for the arts in schools has been reduced.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just a comment from one of our viewers.
Do you know when that was? If it's in the current mayor, because Eric Adams has been a crisis to everything,
I'm sure this person heard it. We'll see how she responds to it.
I think it was Lorraine, right?
Yeah, it was Lorraine.
I'm curious as to when the funding reduction happened.
Well, it's happening all over the country.
Mm-hmm.
Now Paul has to get funneled into the surveillance state, police state, like just the absolute most horrible, violent institutions. Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things I think about with arts funding too is that, even outside of how people access arts funding in public education, which is, like great, like school is just such like plodding misery. Like I hope art class, at least people are having fun in it, right? But thinking about just like broad-based arts funding and how it's structured, and so much of it is like purely coming from like philanthropic endeavors from Wells Fargo or Lockheed Martin or any of these types of things. Like as the general funding dries up, it like pretty much just becomes these philanthropic endeavors by these absolutely like horrific companies. And then anything that they support is going to be like massively, it's going to be like mediated by whatever their aims and goals are, right? Whether that's even just like, well, upper middle class people are getting the money and they run the grant board, so they're only going to give the grant funding to upper middle class people. So going back and thinking to that, like, art as collectivity, art not as like a specialized role or anything like that, of just like, even if you are a person who's an artist who's trying to get into like the mainstream or something like that, like, to do so. And, everybody has different reasons. Like you're going to have to take horrible money, and you're probably also going to have to already be within the middle or upper middle class to like take the money. And so, DIY scenes like our DIY scenes like punk and hip hop, just things that people do within their own communities are like so much more important. As like arts funding and things like that just like shrink more and more and more to these kind of like horrible institutions.
Well, the arts are extremely important to students who may not even be doing well in other fields. At least in art, they can have an opportunity to feel like they're in charge, and they're opening themselves up to doing something. I mean, it's the doing about art that's so magical.
I think one of the things that I constantly think of too is, so I horrible confession. I watch a lot of YouTube videos to relax, right? Like I go and I screen print and I get exhausted and I watch YouTube videos. And most often what I watch is actually people who are like making, they're doing a craft that's like an accessible craft that a lot of different people are doing. So like a mold comes out for a chessboard and then like 100 different people buy this mold and then they all make their own chessboard of it, right? And there's nothing really like significant or revolutionary about making a chessboard, right? But it's like, all of these people are actually having like extreme pleasure in their lives and they're doing something that's just like making something for the hell of it, right? And they're like engaging in like a creative process and stuff. And sometimes like that stuff is so significant to me. Just a lot of, like crafts and different things like that are often like undervalued or relegated to this idea of like, well, that's like the domain of like, old wives, or that's the domain of children, right? And it's actually like, well, a lot of this stuff is some of the most significant and pleasurable and collective activity stuff that we can possibly do. And it actually has like great importance and great value just to people's individual lives, right?
Well, that was part of the feminist movement, which began to value like quilting and other women's crafts as art, which wasn't seen as art before. So.
Well, Lorraine just pointed out that science gets all the money, and that's true.
Yeah, science in the police state, right? Especially.
Yep. But it's even, what type of science, right? Like the science that is trying to address like ovarian cancers is not the same as the science that's making those fucking little robot drone dogs, right? Those like DARPA, like I think we've all seen them and just been horrified by them, right?
I'd like to end, and maybe you want to think of an ending statement too. I'd just like to end by saying thank you to everyone who joined us and came to this topic, because I think the role of art in our lives is generally underappreciated, and I'm always really excited when I see things on social media that engage people back into not necessarily reading, because they often don't have words, but into looking at images and letting images communicate with them. We're not a very visually literate culture, but as a whole society, we're totally hooked on images. So we need to do a lot more in our society talking about images, particularly in Western societies, or what we used to call Western societies, or developed societies. We've moved away from understanding and getting our information. Where do we get our information? And it has to be, for it to be effective, it has to be visual. The vision is our most powerful sight. A sight is our most powerful sense, and it's how we understand our world more than we even understand and think that we do. So thank you for coming.
With 3 p.m., I'm sorry. I'd like to continue this amazing conversation. Thank you so much, Neala. Thanks so much, Bonzo. I mean, we thank you so much, Jim. And we now need to go to the next workshop. That's 3 p.m. and we schedule for that. Thank you again, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Everyone have a wonderful day. Thank you so much.
Anarchism and Indigenous Struggle in Brazil. Presented by New York City Anarchist Book Fair and PM Press. Performed by Sônia Guajajara and Noam Chomsky.
So thank you for coming. Last presentation was Art in Times of Chaos with Bonzo and Neala Schleuning. This presentation is with Noam Chomsky, the social theorist, and Sônia Guajajara, the Indigenous activist and leader from Brazil. For all those that need translation, you may access the translation using the interpretation button below. And
yeah, we are translating Spanish, Portuguese, and English. It means it's just press the button. And thank you so much, Chomsky. Thank you so much, Sônia. Thanks so much, Vera, for being here. Vera will do the mediation, and we are here to open this conversation. Thank you so much.
Well, shall I start?
Yes.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for this invitation to do the mediation of this amazing conversation between Noam Chomsky and Sônia Guajajara. I'll ask them to present themselves. Anyway, I'll do a short presentation. Sônia Guajajara is an indigenous leader and activist. She does the coordination of the Articulação dos Povos Indígenas do Brasil. She's running for the federal legislative branch. And she was elected one of the most influential person by Time magazine this year. Noam Chomsky is a linguist, a philosopher, a political activist as well, author of many books, a public intellectual, and it's amazing to have you two here. So from now on, I'll speak in Portuguese, and I will address some questions to both Sônia and Sônia Guajajara and Noam Chomsky, and then we will start this conversation. So, Sônia, eu vou começar com você, perguntando como você avalia o impacto das grandes corporações no meio ambiente e, em especial, nas mudanças climáticas que vêm ocorrendo no mundo.
Olá, boa tarde, Vera. Muito obrigada por estar mediando esse diálogo. Boa tarde, professor Chomsky, como falamos. Boa tarde, muito obrigada por essa oportunidade, por estarmos aqui, né, nesse diálogo. E quero cumprimentar também todo mundo que está acompanhando pelo link, todo mundo que está acompanhando no YouTube, quem está aqui participando também presencialmente, né, no virtual, que se inscreveu para estar aqui com a gente. Agradecer a todos por essa participação. Bom, falar desse impacto das grandes corporações no meio ambiente, né, é falar do impacto diretamente às nossas vidas, à vida dos povos indígenas, que entende o meio ambiente e o território como o nosso próprio corpo. E a maioria das grandes corporações não conseguem ter uma preocupação socioambiental. E eles se preocupam sempre com o lucro, né, com o que isso vai gerar, né, de valores econômicos. Nós temos feito, periodicamente, muitos relatórios para falar, né, desse impacto que as grandes empresas estão causando.
What this is causing to the environment and to the indigenous people. And the human rights are also violated here in Brazil, especially in the indigenous land. We have important partnerships to do this report, which is the Indigenous movement, leadership, and some support partnerships. We have shown that companies like Anglo America, Cargill, Bunge, and so many others are great violators of our rights and also responsible for the destruction, the systematic destruction of the environment, because it is an authorized destruction, especially with the Bolsonaro administration. There is a tentative to legalize the destruction of the environment and the way of life of the indigenous people. I want to conclude saying that as articulation of indigenous people of Brazil, we bought the right to speak. We bought an action of Black advocate, Dr. Eloy Terena, participated in one of the assemblies of Backlog as a stockholder. So while all the stockholders brought the numbers of the profit of they were making with all this destruction, Dr. Eloy Terena said, now I want to present other numbers. And he brought numbers of the deforestation, the burnings, the expulsion of people from their homeland, and everybody was scared. How did Eloy end up in that assembly? So other strategies that we are using to come to sensibilize these companies, showing them that they are partners of this destruction. And we want to face the awareness, because besides destroying, they have the lobby in the Congress with deputies that are approving measures that legalize the destruction. So it's a constant fight, and we do it every day to reduce the impact in our lives and also in the environment. Thank you, Sônia.
I'd like to hear you on how indigenous languages and culture impact on the social, cultural, political, and global economical systems, and also how language could bring new concepts and structures and behaviors, having in mind the indigenous experiences.
Well, before commenting on the question, the most interesting one, I'd like to just take a moment to say something hyperbolic, sounds crazy, but happens to be true, which we have to keep in mind. The next 2 months are very likely to be the most important months in all of human history. Hyperbolic, madness, but correct. There are, as you know, elections coming up in the most important country in Latin America. Their outcome may well determine whether human history persists. It's not an exaggeration. We're at you know the facts too well for me to have to rehearse them. I'll just take the Amazon. We've recently learned that there is an anticipated tipping point at which the Amazon can no longer produce enough because of deforestation, will not produce enough moisture to sustain the forest. It'll turn to savanna. It was thought that that was years away. Recent studies have shown it's imminent. Studies of small areas in great detail show that the illegal deforestation, logging, expansion of agribusiness, mining has gone to the point where we're coming close to a tipping point. Well, if that is reached, everyone doesn't die tomorrow, but we move into a point where it is irreversible. We just wait for the massive destruction of the Amazon forest, the indigenous people, catastrophe for Brazil, utter disaster for the whole world for reasons you know. That if current President Bolsonaro, if he's not removed from office, will pass that tipping point. And unfortunately, elections may not be enough to remove him from office. You know very well that there are real possibilities of some kind of military coup in one form or another, backed by wealthy sectors. That's a severe danger. Going to the United States, it's an overwhelming danger. There's a very good chance that the Republican Party will gain power over Congress, already controls the Supreme Court, to lay the basis for controlling the executive. It's 100% denialist party. Every leader, this has been true for the last 10 years, every leading figure in the party simply denies that global warming is taking place, or else says maybe it is, but it's none of our business. Let's just go ahead to maximize the use of fossil fuels and to including the most dangerous of them, and eliminate regulations that mitigate their effect. Well, that's coming up in 2 months in the United States, next month or two in Brazil. So yes, this could be the most dangerous period in all of human history. Well, with that in the back of our minds, and it should be in the back of our minds, whatever we're talking about, let's turn to the immediate question. If you look over the past 10 or 20 years, when it's been obvious to everyone with a gray cell functioning and eyes open that we're racing towards catastrophe, it's been very striking to see around the world that the indigenous peoples, tribal peoples, Aboriginal peoples have been in the lead, pleading with the world to pay attention to what's happening. It's true of First Nations in Canada, Native Americans blocking pipelines, tribal people in India making dangerous initiatives to prevent the destruction of the forests in a country that's heading for total catastrophe. Large parts of it won't even be livable, even if current tendencies persist. That for tens of thousands of years, indigenous people have found ways to live in harmony with nature. Well, what we call civilization has just been destroying nature in a massive fashion. If we don't learn the lesson that they are trying desperately to teach us, we'll all be finished. It's as simple as that.
Sônia, você poderia comentar?
Sônia, please, would you be able to comment about what Professor Chomsky has just started talking about, this period, this very difficult time, the next 2 months that we are going to have the elections here in Brazil, and the risk that we have, even for you who are in this dispute, the risk that we are facing for the environment, for indigenous people, for our democracy, who is very fragile, the risk that we have in case there's not a change in the tracks. So Professor Chomsky has just said how important it is, all that, and I think your experience in this journey of campaign can tell us something about what you have thought in this moment. Could you please comment on that, please? So it is a very dangerous moment we are living in Brazil, even for the polarization of the presidential elections. And even though this hate that was put in society coming from the Congress, which promotes more violence, even more violence and more racism practices on the streets. And this has happened in a very frequent way because nowadays people are feel legitimated making the racism act and violence and attacking people because of intolerance. They do not tolerate and they go to fight. So for these elections, it is still very polarized. And as the people who like Bolsonaro, as they have fear of losing this, they are betting everything on the hate, on the violence, racism, conflict. And right now, I just arrived here. I came from Paulista Avenue. We were with our team giving some papers and talking to people, and there was a group trying to confront our team to trigger us. I think giving them some attention. So we needed to have lots of patience, lots of wisdom for us not to respond with the same practice, which is the violence. So this is spread in all places, in every place, and we need to be very careful because we have already had some cases of murder just because they support Lula, PT. The Bolsonaristas don't like that, and they end up killing people, as this happened in Rio Grande do Sul. It started when the petista was murdered by a Bolsonarista when he was celebrating his birthday in Foz do Iguaçu. And now this last week in Mato Grosso, when the person declared that he supported Lula and the other one declared he was Bolsonarista, and he simply just prepared to make this murder, to kill this person. And Guilherme Boulos was confronted on the street now by a Bolsonarista, showing that he had a gun, showing that he could do something. He was threatening the other. This is a very dangerous moment, but also really important, where we cannot step backward. We need to mobilize people for us to destroy right away the Bolsonarism, the fascism that are on the streets. It's with kindness, with love that we are going to win that. We have maybe about 22, 23 days from elections, and we are going to overcome that. We overcame already what was the colonialism, the military problems, and we are going to win that. Sônia, please, I would also give you another question for you, and after that, we are going to listen to Professor Chomsky. Again, related to the environment, to the weather change. These changes, are they being made by the carbon emissions and other factors? which responsible have been the big companies. So my question is, how can this have affected indigenous population in particular, but in general, the people's lives on Earth? This irresponsible emissions by the big companies. Please, I would like you to talk a little bit about that, and I also would like to listen to Professor Chomsky about it. Yeah, that's exactly the same thing. Even though nobody knows or realizes, but people's lives and the environment, they are pretty much the same thing. So if it affects the environment, it also affects directly everybody. However, there us indigenous people who are in front line triggering this comprehension that territory and body and spirit are the same thing, we end up being the first more impacted people. Now, what we need to reinforce always is that some people are more affected than others because society is structured in a very different way, in an inequality way. This climatic differences doesn't reach everybody in the same way. That's the reason we need to think about climatic right more than injustice. When we are talking about the wealth and the richness that are done by the same corporations, they are who suffer the most with this weather changing. According regarding us, the indigenous people, as we are the guardians of the forest, of the territories, we are the ones who more protect the most. We are the most impacted directly by the climatic changes. Many people suffer extreme events such as droughts or floods, and they end up feeling these changes only when this phenomenon happens, when these events happen. But we indigenous people, we are impacted every day when our rivers are dried, when the seasons change, when the seasons of harvesting change. And this affects us directly in our culture when we cannot do our rituals because of the droughts, when we cannot plant our food, or even though the ones we need to harvest in the right time to do these rituals, and the unsafety, food unsafety, when the environment cannot provide us everything we need for us to eat. So these changes for us mean that we are going to be without food, without medicine, without water. So that's the reason this impact directly happens every day. So what we feel every day, if there's not a behavior change, a conscious change in government, this consequence is arriving very quickly for everybody, for all the people.
Professor Chomsky, could you do some comments on this issue concerning climate changes and corporations and how this affects the life of people in the world? Professor Chomsky, okay.
I should tell you that, to my regret, I'm disconnected from this conversation. Two problems. One is being 94 years old and barely able to hear. The other is that the live transcription is pretending it's in English. So all I'm seeing is a comic strip.
No problem. So, so I would hear you. We would hear you on how indigenous peoples could contribute to revert this chaos, environmental chaos. We see that government actions concerning environmental policies are very much contradictory. On the one hand, governments do have policies of protection and preservation, but on the other hand, they really do not stop the deforestation, the gas emissions, and such and such. So if we look to the Brazilian government, we see that there is no respect for the environment in all ways. And this was particularly true for the time the pandemic in Brazil was really, really high. So I would address you this following question. So in which way indigenous peoples could help to revert, to change this administration, these policies and such and such?
Well, first of all, we should face the obvious facts. We live in state capitalist societies in which private power, concentrated private power, corporate power, has enormous influence over the selection of the determination of who's elected and the decisions about what they do. You know all about how this works in Brazil. In the United States, it's been studied very closely. Turns out that electability to Congress is determined overwhelmingly simply by campaign spending. Who spends the money to elect a Congress, somebody to Congress? In Brazil, it's pretty much the same. Once the legislatures are in office, they're subjected to enormous pressure by the powerful elements in the society, those who basically own the economy and run the economy. They have many devices to do it. So many that I don't have to tell you. Take your own finance minister, Paulo Guedes. His slogan is simply privatize everything. That is, let's destroy the world as quickly as possible. He learned his lessons in Chile under the Pinochet dictatorship from Chicago, where that's the slogan. In Chile, they managed to destroy the economy within about 5 or 6 years, then turn to bigger game, seeing if you can apply the same murderous, destructive rules to the entire world. That's the class war that's being waged savagely for the last 40 years, called neoliberalism, with all kind of fakery about markets, but that's the way it works. So what can indigenous people do? What can any ordinary people do? Try to change the array of forces under which the government functions. Create forces that they have to react to, popular forces which will not permit the highway robbery that goes on. And it is highway robbery in the United States, where it's been studied carefully in the last 40 years of class war, the transfer of wealth from the $50 trillion. That's very efficient class war. and it has its effect on policy in all kinds of ways. In Brazil, the failure to even pay attention to, let alone learn the lessons from the brutal years of dictatorship has an enormous effect on the sensibility of the population, the array of pressures that act on the government. Well, all of this can be changed. Popular forces do make a difference, and that's where Indigenous people come. They are the ones who are in the forefront of fighting the struggle to protect the environment, protect from destruction the environment that sustains life. They're right in front, courageously, all kinds of actions, presentations. They have behind them the fact that they have lived for tens of thousands of years in a manner which did protect the environment, was in harmony with the environment. They didn't destroy it. They have lessons to teach. People should respect and honor those, support their struggle, but they can continue to be in the forefront of the efforts to reshape public opinion, public understanding, so that it will move towards not only saving the environment, but creating a decent world in innumerable other respects. Inequality, poverty, misery in Brazil is shocking. It's not just sustaining life for the future, it's creating a decent society for today. I don't have to, my wife, Valeria, happens to be Brazilian, and we visit regularly. I happen to be in Brazil right now. The misery, the poverty, the suffering, right next to incredible wealth and kind of, it's one of the worst places in the world in this respect. So the problems to be faced go far beyond the existential issue of saving humans from destroying themselves. Here again, Indigenous people can be and often are in the forefront of education, activism, struggle, demonstration of what must be done.
Thank you. Sônia,
okay. Noam, if you go to interpretation, you have a button to translation in English. You see the interpretation ball. If you click that, you can listen in English.
Translation into English of what is said, but I can't hear it.
Oh, I see.
Okay.
Sorry.
Problem.
Well, we'll try to manage.
Yes.
Okay.
Sônia, eu acho em relação a essa, tá, em relação a essas ações de governo que são contraditórias, que ora buscam proteger o meio ambiente, mas por outro lado também ajudam no processo de desmatamento, na emissão de gases, nas mudanças climáticas. Da mesma maneira que eu me dirigi ao Noam, eu me dirijo a você perguntando de que maneira os povos indígenas podem contribuir para reverter esse caos ambiental, tendo em vista especialmente o que os povos indígenas passaram muito recentemente agora durante a pandemia da Covid-19, onde foram extremamente afetados pelas não ações do governo, né, pelo completo caos. Então, eu queria ouvir de você exatamente em que medida, não é, o Noam falou que a luta dos povos indígenas, a educação, enfim, podem contribuir para reverter esse caos. Eu queria ouvir de você também a tua opinião sobre isso. Sônia, você está com o microfone desligado, ok.
Sim, mas está com um problema na tradução aí, tá? Eu não estou conseguindo escutar.
There is a problem in the translation. I can't hear it in the Portuguese channel, but I got the. So let's go. It is also important we indigenous people can think about environment politics. And there are indigenous people participating today in government. So think that we haven't explored the strategies enough yet for those means that are linked with environment protection. So when we talk about government politics, when we talk about economic growth, it can't not be separated from the environment schedule. It has to be brought to the center of any politic debate. It can't be anything outsourced. So it is false that we don't need to choose between one thing or the other. We have to connect and see how we do in a sustainable way. Even the term sustainability lost its meaning. So how do you think about sustainable soy? And like many companies persist in defending and creating concepts of destruction. So the forest economy has shown that it's important to value the local ways of production, the benefit, the regionalism. It is important to think about it, and also subsides the mono of agribusiness have subsides and cuts from the government, and the local economy are devalued because we are used to thinking about commodity production for exportation. So that's what everybody thinks that is the salvation for Brazil and the economy, and they don't open for other ways and alternatives. So they devalue all the ways, means of economy that there are in this diversity that is Brazil. So it is.
Pela agricultura familiar, é o que a gente come, né? É o que alimenta a população brasileira.
Obrigada. Chegou uma pergunta aqui no nosso chat.
There is a question here in our chat. I will address it. It is in English. I will say it in English. See if the translation will work for you, Sônia.
There's a question that came through our chat, addressed by Bhagat Singh, and he says, building upon this vital question about corporate culpability for climate change, I'd love to hear the speaker's thoughts on how defending the earth necessitates fighting militarism and imperialism, especially given that the US military is the largest single institutional polluter in the world. So, what do you think, Noam?
Well, it's true when
É verdade quando
pollution created by
a
the
poluição
US
criada
military is,
pelo exército
of course,
americano
extraordinary.
é extraordinária.
But beyond that, you can't distinguish
Você
militarism
não
and imperialism.
consegue distinguir o militarismo e o imperialismo.
Imperial rule has, in fact, instituted, imposed, and sustained brutal, repressive societies all over the world,
Sociedades
which are
imperialistas
dedicated to wealth and power and have no concern for the decent life for human beings or even preserving the environment. So, yes, fighting both militarism and imperialism.
Militarismo e imperialismo
An essential part of trying to move towards a survivable and a decent world. Can't be any question about that. It's true even in simple numerical terms. The U.S. Military expenditures overwhelm the rest of the world. The United States spends more on the military than the next 10 or 12 countries combined. A fraction of what's wasted in destruction would suffice to develop the sustainable energy that's necessary for the United States to eliminate the use of fossil fuels. That's quite apart from what it does to the rest of the world.
Sônia, então.
Sônia, to defend the land, the question,
The comment is
to defend the earth is that you will fight against
defend.
imperialism and militarism.
They are
they are
responsible in greatest part because of the pollution, for the. Is there any comment you could do about it? And in sequence, please, I will give you the question. Nowadays, in the
Você está ouvindo direito a boa tradução? Como é que está essa coisa técnica?
Agora eu te ouço, Adriana, mas anteriormente não estava.
Você quer, porque a gente pode fazer o seguinte, a gente pode, que eu acho que vai funcionar bem para você e para o Noam, que é você fala, a gente traduz, aí, entendeu? Ele fala, a gente traduz, a gente pode fazer também desse jeito. Você acha melhor?
Não, acho que é só arrumar aí mesmo, sabe? Porque está funcionando o que é de português, está fazendo de inglês.
Tá, vamos arrumar isso, porque você tem que entender bem.
Sônia, e a minha pergunta foi, deu para ouvir bem?
Sônia, could you hear my question?
Eu não escutei o começo, mas acho que...
I did not listen to the beginning, but you go next and keep doing the one you were starting right now.
Se você não me ouvir, por favor, pode me interromper e me pedir para repetir.
If you...
Então, Sônia, estão passando por crises, em relação ao meio ambiente, crises em relação à própria política, e nós hoje vemos cenários de erosão democrática. nós vemos nesse cenário a formação...
Vera, eu não consigo te escutar, porque você está falando agora e a tradução está entrando no meio da sua fala. A tradução não, né? O inglês está entrando por cima do que você está falando.
Será que não daria para desabilitar o inglês, a tradução da plataforma agora, Sônia?
Uai, eu estou em português, né?
Não, eu digo desabilitar durante a pergunta e depois reabilitar. O que você acha?
Não, porque quando você fala, não é para escutar tradução nenhuma, né?
Exato.
Está vindo uma tradução em cima da sua fala, para inglês, entendeu?
Entendi.
Se você fala português, eu preciso escutar você em português.
Então, é só botar naquela bolinha que tem interpretação em português entendeu? E aí vai ficar bom.
Senão a gente tira a interpretação e a gente prossegue com a Vera.
Repete, Vera, por favor, essa pergunta que você estava fazendo. Vamos
então,
ver se...
as democracias estão passando por crises e políticas ambientais, éticas, de todo tipo. E a gente tem visto cenários de erosão das democracias ao redor do mundo. O Brasil é um caso entre tantos. A gente tem visto também surgir novas formas de fascismo. A minha pergunta é como a participação dos povos indígenas nos espaços institucionais, como o legislativo, pode contribuir no sentido de combater essa crise, essa erosão e essas novas formas de fascismo.
Bom, agora escutei bem a pergunta toda.
Que bom, que bom.
Não houve interferência, não houve erosão na sua pergunta.
Legal.
Bom, é preciso que nós indígenas, possamos interferir, né, de maneira positiva na elaboração das leis que garantam essa cosmovisão dos povos indígenas. Né? Essa visão do território como um todo, né? Falar do território não é somente falar da terra, é falar do território água, do território floresta, do território terra. É falar do território moradia, do território meio ambiente, né? Para as pessoas poderem entender esse todo, que não é uma parte, né? Não é o meio somente, né? Mas o todo. Então, nós temos essa visão mais ampla, né, de como proteger o meio ambiente. E isso precisa ultrapassar nossos discursos e se inscrever nas leis e receber previsão orçamentária para a execução. Você vê que hoje nós temos toda a iniciativa dos guardiões da floresta, dos guardiões do território, que são iniciativas próprias, locais, das comunidades, né, dos territórios indígenas, e a maioria dessas iniciativas garantem toda, né, uma proteção, um monitoramento, independentemente do Estado. Se não há políticas efetivas de proteção ambiental, hoje os guardiões fazem esse trabalho e garantem, né, uma redução.
They assure a reduction, a very big reduction for the deforestation, and there's not an incentive of state politics. So it is extremely important that this initiative, this common vision of indigenous people, it can also have budget for them to have more effectivity. And they are in the protection of environment, and they are thinking in our fauna. They are not.
Então, quem pensar ainda, né, a proteção ambiental somente pensando em fauna e flora está totalmente equivocado, porque quem protege de fato, né, são os modos de vida. A exemplo de nós povos indígenas, mesmo em territórios não demarcados, somente a presença é garantia de água limpa, de floresta em pé, de alimentação sem veneno. Então, os
Eu não estou
territórios
entendendo, cada hora eles estão falando uma coisa, eu vou parar de fazer.
das grandes tecnologias e uma das últimas alternativas.
Bom, eu vou fazer, não quero nem saber.
Essa barreira contra o desmatamento, contra o avanço das fronteiras agrícolas, da exploração de minérios, né? Então, é importante valorizar isso, né? E também dar as condições para que a gente continue fazendo, né? Então, o meio ambiente se protege com a garantia dessas culturas e dos modos de vida tradicional. Não somente pensando, né, em novas e altas tecnologias, né? Porque somente, até porque a própria produção dessas tecnologias que se pensam, por exemplo, a reduzir mudanças climáticas, por si só já geram emissões, né? Então, nós precisamos de leis que reflitam esse todo. E o que nós estamos pregando é uma nova consciência, né? Política, ecológica, global, onde todos devam compartilhar a responsabilidade pelo meio ambiente, porque está ficando muito pesado, né? Está tudo nas nossas costas, e acaba que as pessoas cobram de nós.
It ends up that people charges on us this responsibility for this protection. So what happens is that the Congress closes and they do not talk about it. The Congress have the representative democracy that it doesn't get the diversity, it doesn't embrace all the presence that is in Brazil of people from Black people, Indigenous people. So we need to overcome this gap that is between the parliament and the people. There it is known as the people's house. And where are people there? In the audiences that are talk about our exactly this law 91 that authorizes the mining in the indigenous lands. We got the act by the earth this year. We had artists and indigenous people, and we went to Brasilia to protest against this destruction package. Among them, this law 91. And when we were there, what happened? The chamber president calls out reunion, and he approves this in urgency to approve in 30 days this PL of mineration, this law of mineration. It shows that they want to measure strength, saying that they have the power, they have the votes, and they are able to do whatever they want, independent on whatever people are saying and asking. So we cannot, in this distancing and this gap that is between this National Congress and the people. And the federal constitution assures this diversity. It will always happen when we have the indigenous presence in all the powers, including the judiciary. Who knows here an indigenous person who is today in the justice ministry, for example, or in the second instance part? We are talking about presence, not only about ministers. I'm just saying about only having people there working. We need to take this presence for this diversity to be able to take this conversation to inside the institutionality.
Okay. Noam, você podia mais ou menos resumir?
Noam, could you please summarize a little bit? I think we are having a problem in the translation. Could you summarize a little bit of what Sônia has said, and we are inside in this kind of translation? I don't know if I remember everything that Sônia has just said, just the core idea.
She said that the representation should change in the parliament. That's why it's necessary to have indigenous peoples and other representatives in the parliament. Otherwise, they will keep doing conservative politics. She gave as an example the Bill 191, which authorizes mineração, I don't know how to say, in those lands. And so she said that we have to manage this new kind of representation at the parliament in order to reverse this state of affairs. People are not really represented nowadays in parliaments, at least in Brazil. A few representatives do act with the people. It's not enough. Sônia said it's not enough to act on behalf, but it has to act with the people. So it's a new kind of democracy, I should say, that Sônia is advocating for our politics. So in general, that's what she just said. I'd like to address Noam and hear you, Noam, on these new kinds of fascism that we are facing nowadays in the world. So how could we fight these new forms of fascism nowadays in the world, and what kind of language we could, what kind of language could empower us in order to fight fascism nowadays in the world?
Well, I'm old enough to remember personally, vividly, how it was necessary to fight fascism in the 1930s. In fact, the first article I wrote was in 1939, after the fall of Barcelona, about the spread of fascism through Europe, which seemed inexorable, couldn't stop it, terrible threat to the survival of any decent values. It's been necessary to struggle against fascist tendencies ever since. It's very much the case now. Brazil, as you know, of course, better than I do, went through a period of basically fascist military dictatorship. There was a serious error of not trying to come to terms with it. Brazil was one of the few countries that didn't make a serious effort to face up to the horrors of that period. Unaware of it, that should not be permitted. Right now in the United States, the Republican Party is a proto-fascist party. It's not an exaggeration. If you look at the positions it takes on issues, they rank alongside the far-right parties in Europe that have neo-fascist origins. If you just saw that dramatically in the recent conferences in Budapest and Dallas of the far-right international, the US delegation, which was the star of the conference was the core of the Republican Party. Former President Trump made a speech glorifying the hero of the meeting, Viktor Orban of Hungary, whose others poured in with their praise, presented Hungary as the model for the United States, a Christian nationalist, racist, quasi-fascist state in which democratic forms have been virtually eliminated. So how do you struggle with it? It's not a question of language. It's a question of any more than it was in the 1930s. There's no better language. What's necessary is just the old measures. There's no magic keys. Dedicated educational efforts, organization, activism, adapted to particular circumstances. There's no formulas. Has to be done at every level of society, creating a vision of what a free, democratic, participatory society would be based on mutual aid and support and organizing people so that they become dedicated to create it. There are models. Right in Brazil, for example, there's the largest popular movement in the world, MST, which has been taking steps in this direction, significant ones, now beginning to link up with the homeless people movement in urban areas. Enormous popular movement, probably the biggest in the world, model right in front of your eyes. And more participation has to be done, also simply exposing facts. It happened in Chile, voting down the moderately progressive constitution. There have already been some interesting studies of that. It turns out there's quite an interesting study in the New Left Review, the British Left Journal, which studied there are some cases where there are parallel populations, one of which was exposed to the Constitution, knew what it was, the other of which was not exposed to it and only was exposed to the massive, huge propaganda that poured out from the, of course, ultra-right information system in Brazil. Their votes on the Constitution were opposite. You're familiar with this from the 2018 election in Brazil, which was largely swung by the massive campaign on WhatsApp, full of lies and craziness. It's what most of the population sees. Well, that has to be overcome if there's going to be by education organization, if there's to be any possibility of resisting the fascist tide that is spreading over much of the world, including the United States and Brazil.
Well, organization, activism, and education are really three goals that we have to have in mind in order to fight fascism. I do agree with you, and hopefully we will act, organize, and educate in order to fight and to beat fascism whenever it is nowadays. Sônia, eu tenho algumas perguntas aqui no chat que eu
Sônia, I have some questions in the chat. I will summarize so you can answer. And if you want to comment the last question to Noam about how to face fascism in the world, it will go together with the same package of questions. There are two questions addressed to you here, one from Matilde or other one by Adrienne. I will summarize them now. From Matilde is in regards to reinforce the mind. I wanted you to comment how a real change can only happen from a change where the first thought is linguistic, and it talks about repopulate the politics in the system. It talks about changes, systematic changes from inside out, and she wanted to hear you about it. The other question is by Adrienne. What is the change that women, Indigenous women, can make in politics? And I'll add here, what is the difference that Indigenous women promote for the politic, for the daily life politics? And what is the rule of ancestrality in your politics? So if you want to choose where to start from, make yourself at home. And I'll ask Carlos and the translators if they have to translate your answer or if we move forward. So Sônia, it's your turn. I'm sure you asked me 4 questions at once. I'm sure I asked you 4 questions, but they came through the chat, so you can choose how you want to answer. If you want to answer all at once, that's fine. I'll try to remember each one. And we're talking to the greatest linguist.
Vamos lá. Então, a primeira foi sobre o reflorestar mentes e o aldear, né, a política.
We, Indigenous people in Brazil, were always contrary to occupy the state culture. We didn't want to be part of the system. And we understand that the system that we have is not enough to one indigenous parliament, which was Mário Juruna from Mato Grosso, elected by Rio de Janeiro, at the moment when the people understood that we needed to change the way to represent. After Mário Juruna, we had more than 30 years of absence of the indigenous people at the National Congress. In the parliament, in the legislative assemblies, we never had an indigenous representative in the whole history. We never had a state representative indigenous. We always required this participation in the dispute with the indigenous people. And we understood that only the social movement wasn't enough to stop violence and the walking backwards. And if it is in the National Congress that the laws are made and the executive, the laws are put in practice, we understand it was time for the indigenous presence. In 2021, we had this invitation with the Indigenous Women March, and the theme was Originary Women Reforesting Mind to Heal the Land, understanding that the humankind is sick, the land is seeking for help, and we found the antidote to heal COVID-19, to end coronavirus. But for the climate changes, the only medicine is the awareness of the humankind. So we called the Indigenous Women March to reforest minds. And we started the reforestation idea, understanding that it's time to retake it, the affection, solidarity, love, in the collective life. For us to bring collectivity principles to the center of politics debate. So we have to have this new thinking, this new awareness, and to think how people reforest their minds and their ideas and hearts. And that's the only way where we reforest all territories in the world. And we did this calling in 2022 to repopulate Brazil in politics, not only with the indigenous presence, but also with the perspective of cosmovision that the Indian people have with the nature and Mother Earth. So it is important to have a female presence, which is the third question. As we call the indigenous representatives, which is called by the earth, we also did this calling, the coca calling, understanding that the women participation in this electoral dispute. We women have this direct connection, and we are in charge every day to educate our children. Every day we are taking care of our elderly. We are nurses, psychologists, doctors, mothers, and we understand that this presence of indigenous women will also take to National Congress all the sensitivity to populate the politics in the relationships. So that's why we're saying that this is a calling by the earth, and also stating that those who don't hear the call by the earth is not going to hear the calling by anybody. And we warn you all while the earth is crying and asking for help, because when it stops crying, there's not going to be any more solution. That's the idea of reforesting the mind and repopulate Brazil, and to have respect to the ways of lives and the relationship that the indigenous people have with Mother Earth, understanding that it is a woman. Thank you so much.
We are going to the last 15 minutes. So no one
15 minutes left until the end of this amazing conversation. And my suggestion is that you and Sônia could address some thoughts and words for the people who are listening to you, to us, in these final minutes, and having in mind that this is the New York City Anarchist Book Fair So we have also to address these amazing people that that wants to change the world, suggesting new forms of political change. So Noam, could you take this last minutes to address some words to the revolutionaries and and all these people that wants to change the world, please?
Well, revolutionaries, if they want to succeed, rather than to produce nice words that make them feel comfortable, have to take into account the realities of the situation. You can't, we live in this world, may not like it, but we do. And we have to face the characteristics of this world. In this world, to deal with the environmental crisis, we're going to have to work within basically existing institutions. You look at the time scale for possible large-scale systemic change, revolutionary change, compare that with the time scale that's necessary to overcome the crisis, the existential crisis of whether we will manage even to survive. They're not in sync. The long-term problem is far beyond the immediate problem of overcoming what may be tipping points at which we have lost the hope of maintaining human society. It's unfortunate, but it's true. That doesn't mean that you abandon efforts to lead to lay the basis for much more substantial social change. Of course you do. You do it both by education and by creation of alternative institutions. I mentioned the MST in Brazil. It's the beginnings of what could be alternative institutions. Same in the United States. Go to, take, say, the old Rust Belt in the United States, deindustrialized under neoliberal globalization for the purpose of corporate profit. A lot of people haven't given up. They're forming worker-managed enterprises which find their place in the growing service economy. Well, those are elements of what might be a revolutionary change in American society, which working people control their own institutions, others control their own communities. That's the way revolutionary change takes place, by building systematically, slowly. At the same time, we have an urgent crisis that has to be overcome. No way of escaping that fact. So it's not the first time this problem has arisen in human history by any means, but it's the most urgent one that's ever arisen. And you've got to have, I mean, the younger people are just facing a question that has never arisen before. It is their responsibility to determine whether human society will survive in any organized form or will simply crumble and disappear. No way of avoiding that question. It's a terrible responsibility. It's an exciting challenge, and it just has to be met.
Right. We have to ask this question every day in order to move on in changing and making the changes and so and such and such. Sônia, então a gente está nos últimos minutos.
So Sônia, we are in our last minutes, And we also would like to listen from you. Which actions or how, which actions can be made according to Noam Chomsky has just said? We need alternative institutions. How do these indigenous people can collaborate for these changes that are so necessary in front of this all these crises that we are facing now, that we have faced? So I would like to listen from you how the traditional politics, form of politics can be overcome through new ways, through new formats, and new and alternative institutions and new designs. Even though for this, as Noam said, we need to use the instrument of traditional politics for us to overcome and to give a step forward in the sense of reinventing the institutions, and institutions, as Noah just said, institutions that are not simply more of the same. That's it. I would like to listen from you. And another thing, Sônia, how can we take responsibility? All of us, how can we articulate this? How can we articulate ourselves? Inclusively, the way of participating more in these electoral parts. We cannot keep using this partisan way of organizing people, the actions, the political projects in the country. The parties, they reproduce this old way of thinking and prioritizing also the participation. We have a democracy that does not embrace that, and the parties, they reproduce this old practices of electing always the same ones, and we saw that this did not work. We should have more indigenous people, more Black people, more women, more young people in these spaces, in the Legislative Assembly, in the National Congress, for example, and also in the management of the government. And we use the parties nowadays because this is the way that we have to occupy the system. But if we could participate in an electoral dispute to occupy the spaces from our movement, it would be the ideal world. I think nowadays, this way of the collective candidates with the collective parties, it's a way of promote this change. But it's still being very little because these collective mandates, they are not acknowledged by our electoral law. And people, they're there just there pretending. I think we cannot think about the diversity of the pretension and a diversity of pretension. We need to be there directly working. We indigenous people, we solved to launch the repopulate politics, trying to promote now and starting this change. And we have indigenous in this picture of democracy that we believe, that we really want. If we want to go to the parties, participating in chains, doing what everybody had already done, nothing's going to be changed. So I don't want to be there, the parties, to be chained, to be tied to them. We need to be free to do our projects, the projects that we believe, and to call society to contribute together with us. And if we can participate, I think in this first moment, electing this representative that had never had the opportunity occupying the institutionality. We are bringing now this possibility, this opportunity of people not only thinking my hat beautiful, not only not only wanting a picture with my earrings, but in fact believing in, trusting and voting in indigenous people to populate the National Congress, to populate the politics. We need to have this presence, but to have them, it is needed people to be together with us. If you are participating now, if you are together, you need not only to find, to think it's interesting and find cool what we do with our way of life to protect the life in the planet, but we need to occupy all the spaces being with power and decision. We need to keep thinking that we need to change behaviors and consumption ways. If we do not have people that are occupying this decision space to promote, to bring this perspective. So it's now is the time to retake the power, time to retake Brazil. That's what we are talking about. It's the time for us to occupy the power, not only the power by the power, but for us to be able to have this opportunity of calling people for this new awareness of political, global, ecological that the world needs. So we indigenous people, we took this initiative understanding that this is urgent. It is urgent to listen to the signals, to the Mother Earth. It is urgent for the to be able to take part of the public debate. We count on you all, we count on everybody to be with us. So we believe that we are not only harvest what we are planting today, but we are thinking also in acting right now to assure the future of next generations. Sônia Matilde said that it is needed to reforest the minds, right? So the proposal here of the indigenous people, especially of the indigenous women, such as you, who is there fighting for a chair in the parliament, is this, to reforest the mind. And with this, promote changes, right? And Cassia also commented regarding this, that is needed to observe that indigenous people, they are in direct connection with kids' education, with elderly care, listening to the call of the Mother Earth. So I think we need to finish here. Noam.
For all of us, I believe that for all of us and for me, such a great pleasure to spend this hour and a half listening you and talking to you and Sônia. This conversation, this dialogue between you and Sônia certainly will stay in our minds and will give us hope and make us act in order to change the world we live in. So I finished right now. Adriana would like to address these final words to our audience.
Eu acho que assim, agora é a hora meio de articular, né? Assim, eu fico
Yes,
pensando...
I think now it's time to articulate. I end up thinking, especially in the old times, now how can we structure this structure? And because I keep thinking, is this the way to go to the Congress, to the politics? But I understand that the indigenous, they tried left, right parties, everything was attacked. So we need to have our own voice, especially women that are the most attacked, I think, in the whole world, the indigenous women. So I think this is the maximum priority because it's a strategic issue of entering and really changing it. Now, especially this relation between the colony and imperialism and how we articulate. We keep thinking and articulating and trying. Thank you very much, Noam. Thank you very much, Sônia. Thank you very much, Vera. It was a great pleasure. I hope this is only the beginning of many articulations. And Sônia is very smart in articulating. I think this is one more field for us to keep articulating. Right?
It was really a pleasure to hear and to host as well.
Então, Sônia, you know.
Okay, so Sônia, your voice to finish, and Noam, you too. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Okay?
Okay, gente.
Great.
Valeu.
Okay.
So much.
Okay.
Obrigadão.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Okay.
Vai lá.
Our next presentation will happen in brief. Sorry about that. So our next presentation will start soon.
The Impossible Community, presented by PM Press, performed by John P. Clarke and Scott Crow.